If the police hadn't come in like that, people wouldn't all have come running out of their houses to see what was going on. My husband and I saw 10 cops beating one man. My husband told the officers, "You've got him handcuffed." One of the officers answered, "Get out of here, nigger. Get out of here, all you niggers." This is how Mrs. Bradley, South Los Angeles resident, described the events of Watts riots. The Watts riots, also known as the Watts Rebellion, was a large series of riots that broke out on August 11, 1965, in the predominantly black neighborhood of Watts in Los Angeles. The Watts riots lasted for 6 days, resulting in 34 deaths, 1,032 injuries, and 4,000 arrests, involving 34,000 people and ending in the destruction of 1,000 buildings, totaling $40 million in damages. It was a low-key traffic stop around 7 p.m. on a Wednesday evening that ignited what would become known as the Watts riots. Stepbrothers Margaret and Ronald Fry were pulled over by a white California Highway Patrol officer while driving their mother's car near the corner of Avalon Boulevard and 116th Street in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles. Rena showed up on the scene and, believing police were abusing Margaret, rushed to pull the officers off of him, resulting in another fight. Rena was arrested and forced into the car, followed by Ronald, who was handcuffed after attempting to intervene peacefully in his stepmother's arrest. As the crowd got angry about the scene they had witnessed, more highway patrol officers arrived and used sticks and shotguns to keep the crowd back from the police car. Hundreds more people flocked to the scene to investigate the sirens there. As 2 motorcycle police attempted to leave, one was spat on. Those police stopped to pursue the woman who they believed did it. The crowd converged around them, sending several other officers into the crowd to assist them. More police cars were called to the scene. The 2 police found Joyce Ann Gaines and arrested her for spitting at them. She resisted and was dragged out of the crowd, which, believing she was pregnant, became even angrier. By 7:45 p.m., the riot was in full force, with rocks, bottles, and more being thrown at the buses and cars that had been stalled in traffic because of the escalating incident. The night after the arrest, crowds attacked motorists with rocks and bricks and pulled white drivers out of their cars and beat them. The following morning, there was a community meeting held by Watts leaders, including representatives from churches, local government, and the NAACP, with police in attendance, designed to bring calm to the situation. Rena also attended, imploring the crowds to calm down. She, Margaret, and Ronald had all been released on bail that morning. The meeting became a barrage of complaints about the police and government treatment of black citizens in recent history. Immediately following the statement by Rena, a teenager grabbed the microphone and proclaimed that rioters planned to move into the white sections of Los Angeles. Local leaders requested the police dispatch more black police, but this was turned down by the Los Angeles Police Department Chief William Parker, who was prepared to call the National Guard. Word of this decision and subsequent news reports about the teenagers' tirade are credited with causing the riots to escalate. Overnight, violence had engulfed the streets as mobs clashed with police, set buildings and cars on fire, and looted area stores. Crowds attacked firefighters and obstructed them from putting out fires. By the end of the 3rd day, rioting covered a 50-square-mile section of Los Angeles, and 14,000 National Guard troops were dispatched to the city, erecting barricades. Further clashes, including sniper fire at police and guardsmen, police raids on vehicles and apartments, and Molotov cocktails. Watts resembled a war zone, and the violence continued 3 more days. Police Commissioner Parker fanned flames by deriding rioters as monkeys in a zoo and implying Muslims were infiltrating and agitating. In the early morning of the final day of the riots, as violence began to subside, police surrounded a mosque, resulting in gunfire and the arrest of people inside. Police ransacked the building next door and tear-gassed the sewers to prevent anyone from escaping. 2 fires broke out and destroyed the mosque. Charges were dropped against arrestees, and the Muslim community accused police of using the riots as an excuse to destroy their place of worship. Over the course of 6 days, between 31,000 and 35,000 adults participated in the riots. Around 70,000 people were sympathetic but not active. Over the 6 days, there were 34 deaths, 1,032 injuries, and 3,438 arrests, and over $40 million in property damage. Many white Americans were fearful of the breakdown of social order in Watts, especially since white motorists were being pulled over by rioters in nearby areas and assaulted. Many in the black community, however, believed the rioters were taking part in an uprising against an oppressive system. The riot was an isolated event, with multiple urban riots across the country taking place in 1964 and 1965 prior to the Woods explosion. In 1964, there was a 3-day riot in Rochester, New York, leaving 4 dead in the New York City neighborhoods of Harlem and Bedford-Stuyvesant. A 6-day riot involving as many as 4,000 people following the shooting of a young black man. In Philadelphia, a 3-day riot following the arrest of a black couple who had gotten into a scuffle with police, and a 3-day riot in Chicago when a black woman attempting to shoplift alcohol was attacked by the store owner and crowds later gathered to protest. Some blamed the Watts riots on outsider agitators, but most understood it as the result of continuing dissatisfaction about living conditions and opportunities and long-standing tension between police and residents. In 1961, the arrest of a black male in Griffith Park for riding a merry-go-round without a ticket resulted in crowds throwing rocks and bottles at police. In 1962, the police raided a Nation of Islam mosque and killed an unarmed man, resulting in massive protests. Over the 2 years leading up to the riot, 65 black residents were shot by police, 27 of them in the back and 25 of them unarmed. During that same period, there were 250 demonstrators against the living conditions there.
It began with police and rioters clashing on a hot Wednesday night. Some believe it could have been stopped right then if law officers moved in force and sealed off the area. Perhaps so, perhaps not. But within a matter of hours, it was completely out of hand. More than 1,500 people were in the streets, many hurling rocks and bottles at the police or anyone else, some attacking the cars of people, white or Negro, who just passed by. 15 citizens injured, 19 officers hurt, none seriously, 31 arrested, 12 juveniles. More than 100 police rushed to the area, sealing off 8 square blocks in an effort at quarantine. The rioting subsided, then began all over again shortly before dawn. KNXT's camera car was hit by rock throwers early in the battle, then later tipped over by a mob of young men and set afire. Night of violence, of senseless stoning of cars and shops.
Go ahead! Go ahead! Go ahead! Go ahead on!
Number of stores broken into, liquor stores cleaned out by mobs. Geez, they really turned that thing over. Now they're going to burn it. It's all the way up. There it goes.
Hey, that's what cost her, Bill. Hey, Bill, that's what cost her. Captain, you been on my line.
No, hey! One little kid. One little kid.
Get that picture. Get that picture. You see, that's what caused me. See that? That's the ball. 13-year-old kid. You see that? What are you guys standing here for? Get on the white man. Get in. White man. Get the white man.
Over the course of these years, blacks have always protested for their rights and stood up for their freedom. After Watts riots, the protests have continued, and the most current one is Black Lives Matter. What is Black Lives Matter, and how it started? Black Lives Matter is an international activist movement originating in the African American community that campaigns against violence and systemic racism towards black people. BLM holds protests speaking out against police killings of black people and broader issues such as racial profiling, police brutality, and racial inequality in the United States criminal justice system.
Let him go! Let him go! Let him go!
And you need 10 men. You wait. You wait.
One bottle. Down, rest.
Thank you, brother. We thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
In 2013, BLM began as a response to a court case, much like the direct action campaign that followed Brown versus Board of Education and other civil rights movements throughout American history, specifically the verdict in state of Florida versus George Michael Zimmerman. George Zimmerman's killing of Trayvon Martin and the jury's verdict in Zimmerman's criminal trial sparked outrage among many and brought light to what would become a disturbing trend. On February 26, 2012, George Zimmerman, a local resident and member of the Neighborhood Watch, shot Trayvon Martin, a 17-year-old African-American man who was visiting his father in Sanford, Florida, to death. Before the shooting, Zimmerman called 911 to report a suspicious person, Martin. Despite the 911 operator instructing him to stay in his vehicle, Zimmerman confronted Martin. What followed would become the centerpiece of a media frenzy for the next year and a half. Recordings from the 911 call painted a vague, yet disturbing picture of the confrontation between Zimmerman and Martin. A cry for help and the gunshot that followed were the only evidence of what happened between the two. On March 19, 2012, the Justice Department and FBI announced the launch of an investigation into Martin's death. A petition on Change.org calling for the arrest of Zimmerman surpassed 1.3 million signatures 3 days later. The next day, less than 1 month after Martin's death, President Obama made a public statement regarding the shooting, saying that the incident required soul searching. On March 26, 2012, 1 month after Martin's death, rallies were held across the country. Finally, on April 11, 2012, Zimmerman was formally charged with second-degree murder. In the summer of 2013, after George Zimmerman's acquittal for the shooting death of Trayvon Martin, the movement began with the hashtag Black Lives Matter. The movement was co-founded by 3 Black community organizers, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tamati. Garza, Cullors, and Tamati met through Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity, a national organization that trains community organizers. They began to question how they were going to respond to what they saw as the devaluation of Black lives after Zimmerman's acquittal. Garza wrote a Facebook post titled, "A Love Note to Black People," in which he said, "Our lives matter. Black lives matter." Cullors replied, "Black Lives Matter." Tamati then added her support, and Black Lives Matter was born as an online campaign. In August 2014, BLM members organized their first in-person national protest in the form of a Black Lives Matter Freedom Ride to Ferguson, Missouri after the shooting of Michael Brown. More than 500 members descended upon Ferguson to participate in nonviolent demonstrations. Of the many groups that descended on Ferguson, Black Lives Matter emerged from Ferguson as one of the best organized and most visible groups, becoming nationally recognized as symbolic of the emerging movement. The activities in the streets of Ferguson caught the attention of a number of Palestinians who tweeted advice on how to deal with tear gas. This connection helped to bring to Black activists' attention the ties between the Israeli armed forces and police in the United States, and would later influence the Israeli section of the Platform of the Movement of Black Lives, released in 2016. Since then, Black Lives Matter has organized thousands of protests and demonstrations. Expanding beyond street protests, BLM has expanded to activism on American college campuses, such as the 2015-16 University of Missouri protests. Since 2014, the Black Lives Matter movement has consistently maintained its position in the public eye. Demonstrations, interviews, social media presence, and frequent discussion in traditional media sources have perpetuated the movement to the present. The end of 2014 marked the successful and widely acknowledged transition of Black Lives Matter from a call to action on social media to a nationwide, organized civil rights movement. From the early demonstrations in St. Louis and Boston in October, Through the demonstrations in November and December, Black Lives Matter had established itself as more than just a talking point. The movement had grown and developed local chapters in key areas. It was responding to the growing unrest about racial tensions brought on by the deaths in Ferguson and Staten Island during the summer months and the subsequent refusal of legal actions against officers responsible. In taking these steps, Black Lives Matter overcame its previous status of viral phenomenon and showed its potential as a significant civil rights movement. Black Lives Matter incorporates those traditionally on the margins of Black freedom movements. The organization's website, for instance, states that Black Lives Matter is a unique contribution that goes beyond extrajudicial killings of Black people by police, embracing intersectionality. That Black Lives Matter affirms the lives of Black queer and trans folks, disabled folks, Black undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all Black lives along the gender spectrum. All three members of Black Lives Matter movement are women, and Garza and Cullors identify as queer. Additionally, Elle Hearns, one of the founding organizers of the global network, is a transgender woman. The founders believe that their backgrounds have paved the way for Black Lives Matter to be an intersectional movement. Several hashtags such as Black Women Matter, Black Girls Matter, Black Queer Lives Matter, and Black Trans Lives Matter have surfaced on the BLM website and throughout social media networks. Marcia Chatline, Associate Professor of History at Georgetown University, has praised BLM for allowing young, queer women to play a central role in the movement. Black people have fought for their lives for many years to show the world how strong and united they are. In a very short amount of time, this movement had many accomplishments and surely will continue to succeed. And the world knows now, Black Lives Matter.